Several of my Republican colleagues have mentioned that some of us came out in opposition to Judge Kavanaugh almost immediately after he was nominated by the president. It was true. Count me in. I was one of those people. And I say that without any apologies whatsoever, because I was familiar with the record of Brett Kavanaugh on the court where he sits. I was familiar with his record as a member of the Bush administration. Didn't have all the information, but I surely had enough to understand that if confirmed and seated, he would be absolutely a member of the hard right majority, which has done so much harm to the people of this country over the last many years. So right off, within 24 hours, I was opposed. And that was exactly the right decision. And that is why I will vote tomorrow against the seating of Judge Kavanaugh. Now, many people in this country do not fully appreciate the role that the Supreme Court plays in our lives. They know the president does. Maybe they know what Congress does. They don't know what the Supreme Court does. So I would suggest, Mr. President, that in North Dakota and in Vermont and all over this country, you got people who are saying, what kind of corrupt campaign finance system do we have? Not just progressives say that, conservatives say that, Republicans say that, Democrats say that. Who believes that in the United States of America, a handful of billionaires, some Democrats, mostly Republicans, can spend hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars to elect candidates who represent their interest? Who thinks that's right? Not many people do. But people do not understand that we are in that position today because of a 5-4 Supreme Court decision regarding Citizens United, a decision which is now undermining American democracy. And there are those who think that Citizens United did not go far enough, that billionaires should be able to give money directly to senators and congressmen, make them directly their employees. I have zero doubt that Judge Kavanaugh will continue that majority approach to allowing billionaires to control our political system. 1965, an enormously important act was signed by Lyndon Johnson called the Voting Rights Act. And it said that all of our people, regardless of the color of their skin, should have the right to vote. Not a very radical idea. And yet a few years ago, the majority of the court gutted that decision, said it wasn't necessary anymore. States would do the right thing. Time has come and gone. Days, hours after that decision was made, 5-4 decision, you had attorneys general all over this country, governors, working overtime to figure out how they could suppress the vote, how they could make it easier on themselves to deny people of color, poor people, young people, the right to vote. That was a Supreme Court decision. So if you're upset and you're wondering about how in America we have states trying to make it harder for people to vote, when our voter turnout numbers are pretty low compared to the rest of the world, that was a Supreme Court decision. I have zero doubt, again, that when it comes to protecting our democracy and the rights of people to vote, that Judge Kavanaugh will be on the wrong side of that issue. Today in America, we are the only major country on earth not to guarantee health care to all people. The Affordable Care Act was an important step forward. By a 5-4 decision, Supreme Court ruled that expanding Medicaid in a state was optional. And we had many, I think 17 states that said, no, we're not going to expand Medicaid. Millions of low-income people, children, were denied the health care that this Congress voted to give them. I have zero doubt that Mr. Kavanaugh will continue that effort to make it impossible for us to guarantee health care to all of our people. Janus decision, attacking unions, 5-4 decision. Muslim travel ban, 5-4 decision. So I didn't need to hear about the issues of sexual assault in the beginning, before it arose. I knew that this nominee would be highly partisan, and that was only confirmed more strongly just a couple of weeks ago when he went before the Judiciary Committee again. So that is issue number one. And if any of you are out there who are now dealing with cancer, diabetes, heart disease, or other life-threatening illnesses, understand that Republicans in a number of states in this country are trying to get the United States Supreme Court to rule that major parts of the Affordable Care Act are unconstitutional, including the protection of people who have pre-existing conditions. So if you're struggling out there with diabetes, with cancer, heart disease, serious illness, worry, and worry a lot about what Mr. Kavanaugh will do with the other four members of the hard right in taking away your ability to get the health care you desperately need at an affordable cost. If you are a woman, or in fact a man, or in fact 70% of the American people who believes that a woman has the right to control her own body, and you don't want to see Roe versus Wade overturned, and that is the last poll that I saw had some 70% of the American people holding that opinion, worry and worry a lot, because I fear very much that if a case, and we think a case may come before the Supreme Court on Roe versus Wade, worry about what Kavanaugh will do with the other four right-wing members of the court. So that's issue number one. If, in fact, Brett Kavanaugh was a choir boy, if, in fact, he was one of the most wonderful human beings ever to walk the face of this earth, based on his policies, based on his decisions, I would vote against them. But, Mr. President, it turns out that maybe he has not been a choir boy. And I could only concur with my colleague from New Jersey, Senator Booker, in expressing what we are hearing in our own office. I come from a small state, Mr. President, and yet as a result of Dr. Ford's testimony, we have received comments from 11 Vermonters who relayed, to some degree, their stories about sexual assault. We received a letter from a woman who was 70 years old who told us about a horrific experience that happened to her when she was 14 years of age. And while almost all of the comments came in were from women, there were some from men who were abused as boys. Some 20 to 25% of women in this country have been sexually abused. Wow. That is a crisis. That is an epidemic. And clearly our goal must be to do everything we can to make it easier for women to come forward with these terribly, terribly painful and life-lasting experiences. Make it easier for them to speak their truth. And yet, just the other day, it is hard to talk about President Trump and continue to use the word unbelievable, because things he does literally are unbelievable every other day. But I think maybe he might have hit a new low, even for Trump. And that is, Dr. Ford brought forth her testimony. I think the vast majority of the American people believed her. And the President of the United States, the man who should be telling women that we want to hear your truth, we want to hear your pain, his president, in the most vulgar way imaginable, actually mocked Dr. Ford. What kind of message does that send to women all across this country who are suffering? It sends the message that they will not be believed, they will be dismissed, and the most powerful person in this country will mock them. Even for a disgraceful president like Trump, this is in fact a new low. But Mr. President, it is not even the policies that I'm quite convinced that Kavanaugh will pursue. It is not only the very serious and credible allegations regarding sexual assault that were in no way fully investigated by the FBI. I read the report, and it was a very limited report. It certainly did not do justice to Dr. Ford. It did not even, the FBI agents did not even interview Dr. Ford or Judge Kavanaugh. Now, I don't know how you have an investigation where you don't interview the two major figures in that charge, the allegation. But it's not only the lingering question that came from at least two credible women, but it is also the very important question of Judge Kavanaugh's veracity, his honesty. And I think I heard more than one Republican member of this body saying, well, you know, if he is lying, he should not be seated to the United States Supreme Court. And yet there is, in fact, very strong evidence that the testimony that Judge Kavanaugh has made recently and in years past, when he was first appointed to a judgeship, was not honest. Let me just give you a few examples of that. In his previous testimony before Congress, before the Judiciary Committee, Judge Kavanaugh was asked more than 100 times if he knew about files stolen by Republican staffers from Judiciary Committee Democrats. Republican staffers stole files, and that was pretty clear. And the question that was asked of Judge Kavanaugh was, in fact, had he seen those files? Was he familiar with those files? And the answer that he gave was no, he was not familiar with those files. Well, it turned out that the emails released as part of these hearings show that these files were regularly shared with Kavanaugh while he was on the White House staff. One of the emails, in fact, had the subject line, spying. 2006, Judge Kavanaugh told Congress that he didn't know anything about the NSA warrantless wiretapping program prior to it being reported by the New York Times. This year, an email revealed that while at the White House, he might have been involved in some conversations about that program. Sounds like he was not telling the truth. 2004, Judge Kavanaugh testified that the nomination of William Pryor to the 11th Circuit, quote, was not one that I worked on personally, end quote. Turns out that may not have been true as well. 2006, Judge Kavanaugh testified, quote, I was not involved and am not involved in the questions about the rules governing detention of combatants, end quote. New evidence released as part of these confirmation hearings suggests that that statement may not have been true. Judge Kavanaugh has repeatedly said that he did not have a serious drinking problem, that he never blacked out, never acted in a belligerent way. Well, there are a number of his classmates who suggest otherwise. In fact, there was just a piece in the Washington Post today, signed by 3 of his classmates, I believe at Yale, who suggested the very opposite. Are they lying? Are these people coming forward into the public eye to be abused, to be attacked? Are they lying? Or in fact, is Judge Kavanaugh not telling the truth? Judge Kavanaugh testified that he treated women, quote, as friends and equals, and, quote, with dignity and respect. Well, you know, numerous entries in his school yearbook would seem to contradict this. The issue here is not just what he did. The issue is not telling the truth about what he did. You know, Judge Kavanaugh is not the only person in America to drink a lot in high school, in college, you know, not the only one. And if he had come forward and said, yep, you know, I did have a drinking problem. I've overcome it, but I did. That would have been perhaps telling the truth, but that's not what he said. And on it goes. So, Mr. President, it is likely, as I understand it, that those of us who are opposed to Judge Kavanaugh will in fact be on the losing side of that vote tomorrow. And I'm very, very sorry about that. But history has a funny way of responding to what goes on. And that is that I think this nomination, to a much greater degree than I think anyone would have expected, has aroused the American people from coast to coast. It has aroused them in terms of the issue of sexual assault and whether we deal with that issue honestly. It has aroused the American people in terms of the issue of veracity and whether or not we're going to have a member of the Supreme Court who in fact is honest. And it has aroused the American people in understanding that the function of the United States Supreme Court is to render justice without impartiality, with justice for all, not to simply represent the wealthy and the powerful and billionaire campaign contributors. So I think this whole process has been an enormous learning experience for the American people. And while we may lose tomorrow, I think that the end results of what has taken place here, the disgrace of what has taken place here, will reverberate in a very positive way for the American people. With that, I would yield the floor.